Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Namaste and welcome to today's 10 p.m. session. We are going to discuss a very important topic about textbooks because now we have the new education policy out. A new education policy is going to require a framework, and under that framework, we are also going to do revamping of our textbooks. I don't know whether it is going to be a rewriting, but certainly something has been promised. And today to talk about it, we've got Shri Raj Vedam, who is very familiar to you. He has been on Jaipur Dialogues quite often, and of course, he is a technocrat. So as a technocrat, according to the Western idiom, he may not have the authority. You know why? Because if Jesus were to walk into Vatican today and say that, okay, that you're teaching this wrong, he would be arrested. He has no authority. He doesn't have a degree in theology, you see. Jesus doesn't have a degree in theology. And of course, a cognate remark that was made was that, somebody made this story. Kabir Das ji somehow, he just came back to earth to look how his teachings were being imparted, and he walked into a Harvard class where Kabir Das was being taught. And he introduced himself. So the teacher and the students were very happy to find Kabir Das ji in person in the class where his teachings were being taught. And they gave him a front seat, and he sat down on the seat, and the teacher started talking about his teachings. Then he raised his hand and said, okay, this is not what I said. So the teacher said, excuse me, we honor you as Kabir Das, is fine, but you don't have the PhD in Kabir Das. I have. So I will teach. So in spite of that handicap, I invite Shri Raj Vedam ji to talk about the way our textbooks have been written. And they seem to be full of the cultural Marxism and postmodernist nonsense that the Marxists imbibed after their economic theories fell flat. And they realized that the only way that they could bring the revolution about was through creating identities. And that's where I think I will hand over to Raj Vedam ji.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Thank you. It's a privilege once again to be on Jaipur Dialogues. So I have a presentation. So let me share a few of that. I'm sharing my screen. So please do feel free to stop me at any point, and we can discuss on any single point on the slides itself. So let me bring this up. And to presentation mode, and let me hide this away. Okay, so are you able to see my screen, Sanjay ji?
Absolutely clear.
Okay. So I would like to lead the dialogue today from the issue of identity and how it has played out in our textbooks. So I'll very quickly go through some slides to talk about this. So I say that there is a need to reclaim the narrative on the Indian identity because for a very long time, our identity has been on the receiving end of a hateful narrative from a variety of sources. Today, we see whether it's a media with distorted one-sided stories or movies with obligatory hatred against Hindus or textbooks that encode distorted history, spurious widespread narratives of oppressed class dynamics. What is clear to us is that disinformation and mischaracterization of Indian identity, their heritage, their history and practices has become mainstreamed, and worse, it is normalized today. So I'd like to very quickly go and trace from the earliest periods to the current time to see the evolution of what we are calling identity in India. I asked with the evocative question, if there is no other, would there be need for an identity? It's a question to reflect on. We have seen that this civilization has been on a quest for ultimate identity. From the longest time, we have had so many enlightened gurus to the present times who have a quest to understand the purpose, goal of life. And we have had great Mahavakyas, Tattvamasi, Thou art that, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, or Buddha's Four Noble Truths, and so on. So our philosophical masters have contemplated identity, who we are in relation to Brahman, and so on. And what we see is, in the ancient times, if there was an identity, it is that we were all in this together. That was a philosophical identity. Eventually, it moved into what we can say a classical identity of Astika and Nastika. Where Astika, things like Nyaya, Samkhya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Vedanta, and so on. Nastika, Buddhism, Jainism, Charvaka, and so on. And there's a tendency today in the present to further divide this into people who look at Vedanta, Dvaita, Dvaita, and others, and also group people as Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs, or just as a collective dharmic civilization, or agamic, non-agamic. So we are seeing evolution of identities. Now, these are all modern categorizations. There is no consensus as far as the ancient times are concerned that these were the things. So moving on, we find that today identity is forced on us by an anti-reflection of the other. For example, from ancient times to 711, we had one identity. We are one, Brahman, Astika, Nastika, no conflict, and the notion of Bharat. However, from 711 current era to present, we have become the other. We have become the kafir, we have become the mushrik because of Arabs, Turkic invasions who came with one book, one God, one way, and so on. And since the Europeans came 1498 to present, again we are the other. So we have become pagans, castes, idolaters, Aryan, Dravidian, polytheistic, and so on. So the colonialists came about with one God, one way. We are looking at the Indic identity. So bottom line is, identity has been forced on us today by an anti-reflection of the other. That is our identity. Others have defined it for us. And today, unfortunately, we have fractured identities in India in the present time. We are told there's an equidistant secular government, which is unfortunately in bed with vested interests, with Marxists, with academia. And they create spurious identities, tensions, and destruction via the creation of unequal laws, a disincentives to being Hindu, creation of bigoted laws, institutionalizing distortions and divisions. So we have become things like this mishmash over here. The people label with Brahmin patriarchy, or Dalits, or Dravidian backward caste, forward caste, Aryan, Brahmin village, SC, ST. All these kind of fractured identities are pushed on us, and this is what we have become. It is interesting also to correlate identities with invasions and the economy. If you were to look at the economy of India, going back to the current era, beginning of the Common Era, we see that with 33% of the world GDP, as per Angus Madison's data, we see a steady decline, approximately 10% in 1,000 years. We see that going through several periods, the downward forces are the ones that are pushing down the economy. Things like when Islam entered Sindh, Delhi Sultanate destructions, the Mughals, and so on. And the upward arrows are the ones that are propping up the economy with their consolidation. Things like the Gupta Empire, the Chola Empire, Vijayanagar Empire, and so on. When we come to the Mughals, we see a sharp decline. With Maratha consolidation, we see once again it has gone up. With the British colonial period, once again dropped, and a new India. But what is interesting is identities can be correlated. Early on, we were just Bharat. With Vijayanagar Empire, we see the word Hindu came into use more prominently. With the colonialists coming into India, the destruction of temples, libraries, genocides, we saw this word Hindu coming in. With colonialists, we became Aryans and Dravidians. Now, with neo-ethnocide, we have got new identities that are supported by the Marxists and so on. This is what we're going to see. So what is the impact of identity in India? So manufacturing of the other has led to enormous breaking India or anti-Hinduism forces. And today we see non-stop hate and attack on the Hindu identity. We see a very obnoxious messaging done by groups who are keen on destroying the Indic civilization. Wherever you go, whether you go to northern India or southern India or in colleges and other such places, we see this kind of obnoxious message coming in. And we got to sit back and ask, Why this hatred? Why this hatred on the Hindu civilization, which is a stand-in for the Indian civilization? Why is that happening? Today we see even media, universities are hotbeds of Hindu phobia. Wherever you go, whether festivals are demonized and our sacred spaces like temples are demonized, and people come out with monsters they've created, with strawman monsters they've created and attacking Hinduism and so on. Even students in United States, for example, Hindu students in the Rutgers universities and elsewhere, led by professors like Trashke and others, they have gone on warpath, literally going out on the streets like common hooligans, literally with megaphones and talking about perceived Hindu phobia and such fascism ideologies. And we are also, in the United States at least, we looked at the California textbook controversy in 2017, when there's a whole lot of consolidation of inimical forces led by people from Witzel to Thapar and others who wrote into the California textbook committee to reject many of the real issues that the Hindu groups are coming up with to change the textbook. So we see there are definitely forces allied against Hinduism. So the question is, which agencies are complicit in manufacturing such identities, and why? And how did we get here? That is important if we are going to talk about textbooks itself. So in terms of identity, when we see today there are people who are saying they have a caste identity, or these are thrust on us. Some people with religious identity, some with regional identity, some Aryan Dravidian identity, language identity, Indian American kind of hyphenated identity, South Asian, or you see some people South Asian, North Indian, Tamilian, Dravidian, backward caste, atheist, not Hindu, or some even more enlightened people saying we are world citizens or corporate citizens, identity and such things. Question is, who's pulling the strings? Clearly the strings being pulled, and people are just merely enacting these messages that have been programmed into their minds mindlessly. So the question is, who is doing this? We see the early identity frameworks when the colonial people, the Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British, 16th to 20th centuries, when they came to India, they came and hand in hand with Christian imperialism, people like Howard Calville, Geo Pope, and hundreds and thousands of other missionaries, hand in hand with Eurocentrism, which brought about tools like linguistics, anthropology, and caste, like people like Herbert Risley, Max Muller. With circular arguments, they first impinged on the identity of Indians. Who are these Indians in the northern part of India, southern part of India? Did they come from, yes, they did come from Central Asia, and these kind of assertions and such things. This had a strong bearing on discussing the identity of Indians. If we think those are all things of the past, unfortunately, those frameworks continue till today. Today, the Aryan invasion migration theory, along with academia, which puts foreign lenses on sociology, they enforce these lenses that are appropriate for the Western experience, Western civilization, force fit into India. And then they work hand in hand with archaeology, people like Maria Gimbutas, Colin Renfrew, and others, hand in hand today with tools like genetics, like David Reich and others. They again have circular arguments, and these directly impinge on the Indic identity, who we are as Indians. So these are the forces that are doing that. We have seen that the destruction of identity began a long time ago, from the Islamic era onwards. But let me start on the accelerated destruction on the ethnocide of Indians. If you look at the UNESCO declaration in 1981, it says ethnocide means an ethnic group is denied the right to enjoy, develop, transmit its own culture and language, collectively or individually, extreme form of human violation or rights violation, and so on. And we see this directly applicable to India, because if you look at what the British did, they orchestrated ethnocide through 5 mechanisms: creation of widespread poverty, destruction of identity via manufactured caste and so on, destruction of identity via distorted history, destruction of religion via missionary activity, destruction of education systems via introduction of English and the starving of Sanskrit. All of these things led to an ethnocide of Indians. And I will not even talk about this. I talked about in my talks earlier. Poverty, we have 3 witnesses. One is Angus Madison, Will Duran, Utsa Patnaik. Everybody has talked about this, how the British impoverished India. So what was a rich nation thoroughly became impoverished when the British left India. As far as the identity of caste is concerned, several people have again talked about how discredited anthropological methods are used by people like Herbert Risley, who used metrics like ratio of width, the height of the nose to classify the races of people. He saw this many races in India by this color code that you see over here. These have been discussed at length. For example, if you take the conception of caste, Nicholas Dirks talks in Caste of Mind, or Raja Malhotra and Arvind Neelakantan have done a great job in breaking India at summarizing some of these forces. If you look at the Indic education, if you look at the works of Dharampal in Beautiful Tree, he's summarizing how Indian education was prior to the British starting their machinations. These are by the British records itself. And we know that poverty destroyed the education systems across the country. Then when Macaulay came with the English Education Act in 1835, bottom line was they stopped education in Sanskrit and Arabic and funds their only use for propagation of English. A disconnection was made for the more than 100 years now, where Indians cannot connect with their past. Distortion of history, we have talked extensively about this. Aryans is a spurious identity, Dravidian another spurious identity, and this fact or this assertion that Aryans imposed Vedic religion, oppressed Dravidians by Brahminical priesthood and backwardness, poverty, all this rubbish. So the problem is this has resulted in a failure to inculcate a national identity. A positive narration of history is not there for us. And because of that, students or even adults cannot connect to the past, and we have become disconnected and rudderless. That is the sad reality of who we are today. And today, here we are at present-day machinations where our identity continues, unabated destruction continues. We see there are three main actors today. The government, through a policy of bringing discriminating laws against the majority over here, through a process of appeasement, impinges on the rights of Hindus. We see academics, media, and NGOs through a process of appropriation, adhikara of the message, and through distortion of the text, that they are alone qualified to translate text, and the way they translate is how scholarship is, the adhikara that Sanjay ji talked about earlier. They impinge on our identity. Other groups, or religious groups, through a process of claiming persecution and victimhood, and through a process of proselytization, they change the demographics. All three forces, once again, results in identity of India getting destroyed, and these act at the behest of Western identity narrative. Evangelist pressures like this United States Commission for Religious Freedom and many other agencies of the sort pouring money into these kind of activities. So the frameworks that applied on our history are the colonial, historically, the historiography of India, then going on to Eurocentric forces, we talked a little about that. Western interests, we talked about that, about some of the missionaries. Then the socialist academia bias and the Marxists. All of these people are controlling our history narrative today. And today, the whole place is ruled by the Marxists, because we know after Indira Gandhi's survival, political survival, making a pact with the communists, Nurul Hassan, who became the HRD minister in 1972, he appointed and controls the entire ecosystem of leftist Marxist education, where so many bodies were set up during his tenure. And only people appointed to these bodies were people who were of a socialist leaning or a Marxist leaning. So in the last 60 to 70 years, we have completely eradicated the non-leftist, non-Marxist scholarship in India. That is why we are the situation that we are today, where we are unable to dislodge this ecosystem and start the EMIC, the insider scholarship. It is because of the deep roots put by the Marxists today. And what is the problem with Marxists? The problem with Marxists is that there's fundamental philosophy. All history is a history of class struggles. By looking at history as one of conflict, the whole narrative has been changed by them. If you look at socialists, there is no difference at all. Communists believe in violent revolution to change the old order, whereas the socialists seek change and reform through democratic processes within the existing social and political structure. That is the only difference. Otherwise, both of them rely on certain conflict models and these kind of things. So with this as background, we can start a discussion on textbooks itself. So I ask these questions. Are textbooks aligned with Indic values? Do they show historical, social, and cultural foundations of India's civilization? Is history or social and cultural evolution analyzed in the larger framework of its ideal form and contextual explanation of its practical evolution. Has the conflict model, oppressor-oppressed model of the Marxist, in discourses on social dynamics, allowed all of these lenses. Failure to bring in the systems perspective of cohesive viewing of India's internal dynamics, bringing out the underlying framework of unity in the civilization, has resulted in severe distortions. So if we take up these examples in the textbooks, we'll see factual errors, we'll see semantic distortions, suppression of facts. All of these result because of these 5 frameworks that I talked about. These 5 frameworks are controlling it, and they obscure the truth about the Indian civilization. So we now have a guiding document called NEP 2020 that on the face of it is good because it wants a rootedness and pride in India, rich, diverse, ancient, modern culture, knowledge systems and traditions. Looks fantastic, all these things. And also the ability to be educated in one's language, culture, traditions is not a detriment, but a huge benefit. And knowledge of our cultural history, arts, language, traditions can help children build a positive cultural identity and self-esteem. These are the goals, but the question is, can we get here? Can we get here? And I will stop, I think, after this. So the common issues in the NCERT or SCERT textbooks, what we see is there's an erasure of Hindu periods. The Hindu periods have become increasingly smaller and smaller with every iteration of the textbook, and they've continued to omit content on Hindu periods, viewing Hindu periods as oppressive. If they give out a one whole chapter on Islamic era, if they provide one paragraph on Hinduism, even that one paragraph has become an oppressive kind of a narrative. That is what we see in the textbooks. Erasure of Islamic genocides and crimes against humanity, completely erased. We see a false narration of benevolent Islamic periods. I've seen texts where they say that Alauddin Khilji was a benevolent and able administrator, things of this nature, completely flying in the face of facts. The failure to show misery of Hindus during Islamic rule. Muslim rule succession is shown as if it is smooth, one ruler leading to another, one dynasty leading to another, completely erasing Hindu resistance in every period of time. It is as if it did not even exist. And the failure to discuss in context. There is a piecemeal approach where one small segment is taken out, demonized, and thrown out. There is no contextual explanation. All of Hindu social structures are demonized. Only the Marxist conflict model is used. And I don't even have to say this. There's a failure to build a cohesive identity, because how can a student build an identity when he's told that chap sitting in the first bench, his ancestors are responsible for your ancestors to have suffered? Completely spurious narrative, but this kind of a conflict model can never build a national identity. I think I have some more slides over here, Sanjay ji, but I'll stop over here so we can have a discussion.
Quite beautifully summarized. And of course, your model actually leads into what the social sciences, why they're called sciences, I've never understood. Today we had a session with Pandit Satish Sharma from UK, and he called them social anti-sciences or even anti-social sciences. Anyway, both terms work fine as far as I am concerned. But certainly they cannot be social sciences. You know, this is one of those deep-rooted inferiority complexes among the people who teach humanities, that they try and equate themselves with sciences without having an iota of what is called the scientific system. No system of verification, no system of universalization, no system of repeatability, and, well, social sciences do not even permit falsification easily. They are set in their dogmas. Yet they call themselves social sciences. Just look at that. That wonderful grand narrative that they have built for themselves. But we fail to challenge that as well. Now, the problem in NCERT textbooks, of course, I've had a couple of presentations by people like Neeraj Atriji, who have actually analyzed textbooks of certain classes, class 6, class 9, and they presented this, and they actually bring out exactly what you're saying. But the problem doesn't stop there. I have interacted with scientists, and they say that even the science books do not present any picture of Indian sciences. They teach
Yes.
maths in the classical Bertrand Russell way. They teach maths in what is called the not the empirical method, but in the puritanical method of the church,
Right.
where they teach mathematics as the perfect science, and that is mathesis. That is the some kind of what is called another dogma,
Yes.
because mathematics was actually, the arithmetic and mathematics was invented in India. Everyone recognizes that. Even the worst of the hostiles recognize that today. And it was actually invented for a practical purpose. And the practical purpose was the computational purpose. But now, if you have to compute, if you have to prove 2 plus 2 will 4, because proof is so important according to them, it takes something like 378 pages in the
Right.
Principia Mathematica of Russell. So the mathematics being taught, the science being taught, is also antediluvian. And we don't see any movement on that either.
True enough. So this is a recurring theme that I found myself in reading some of the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics textbooks. There is no attempt at all to embed things in a historical tradition to see where these ideas came from. So that itself constitutes a loss of identity for students who want to understand where it come from. Because the dominant narrative is that everything came out of the West. Everything came out of the West, and people unquestioningly buy this kind of narrative. You talked about mathematics. Even mathematics, there are continual attempts to remove India out of the tradition. In fact, if you were to read some of the history of mathematics between 1950 to even 2000, some of the textbooks by American and European authors, India's got a very small role in that. The only role, once they start with Babylon, Greece, they quickly go to Renaissance Europe, and all of mathematics is to be rooted over there. So the Indian contributions are minimized for God knows what reason, although people like Colebrook and others have been translating it for the last 200 years. So we have known about the Indian algebra, about the Indian mathematical content and so on. There is still a disputed way of doing it. All this stems from our distorted history. If one removes the constraint of Aryan invasion theory, this Aryan invasion theory that states that these Aryans came from Central Asia into India in 1500 BCE, and after that, only then India slowly ramped up, because these are pastoral people. They destroyed a civilization, Harappa, which is there, and these pastoral people were useless guys, illiterate. They had no script, they had no nothing and all these things. Till Magadha had contact with Greeks, 300 BCE, Indians are not civilized. So the first cities came in India only after Magadha's contact with Greece. This is there in the NCERT Standard 12 textbook, by the way. So this is the narrative that is there, which means how can India have contributed anything to science and technology, even if you say Harappa 1700 BC, from 1700 BC to 300 BC, India cannot have had any intellectual tradition because, face it, you're all illiterate people. So when proof is found in Babylon, for example, the cuneiform tablets, there is now a tendency to say, look, historical tradition says cuneiform tablets are found in Babylon. Therefore, they were the originators of much of these base 60 mathematics that we see, and not the Indians. Because anyway, we know from your history, you're illiterate people, and you all learned these things. This is the problem of somebody called Seidenberg, who wanted to see the history of mathematics. He was saying, all right, let us just take the Pythagorean, so-called Pythagorean triples. So he said, clearly there is evidence in Baudhayana Sulva Sutra, clearly there is evidence in Shatapatha Brahmana, all these works, including Babylonian works. So he wanted to say, Pythagoras was not the first, and he's correct in saying that. But then he had to resolve the issue of who knew it before. Was it the Indians or the Babylonians? As far as India is concerned, he scratched his head. Indian history is saying 1500 BC, Aryan invasion, illiterate people. How can they have done all these things? So Harappa, there is some evidence, but these guys are illiterate. Therefore, he took the clever way out, not clever and safe way out. He said either the Indians and Babylonians might have learned from a common earlier source. And he failed to say what that common earlier source is. But in my talks, I've shown that if you take a look at Harappa, just one example, in Harappa, in Kalibangan, there's an example of a tile floor. If you look at one of the pictures from Harappa, it shows on the floor has got a tile, and the tile has got a pattern.
Kalibanga is in Rajasthan, by the way.
Yes. Kalibangan, Rajasthan, with tiles on that, and those tiles have got a very distinctive pattern. And what is that pattern? I have connected that pattern to Baudhayana Silva Sutra, showing the inscribing of a square in a circle. How that was done, using nothing but a rope that is pivoted to a point, and you draw circles and intersection of circles, and you're able to draw a square. That is a Silva Sutra in Baudhayana, and that is played out in the pattern that you see in Kalibangan. So I'm saying now, wait a minute. If you tell me Baudhayana Silva Sutra is 1800 BC, clearly either he proposed it, or he lived in an earlier time frame, or he was talking about tradition that is already there in Harappa. How can you say that square root of 2 and other things came from Babylon? Because clearly that kind of geometrical pattern requires knowledge of square root of 2, the side of the diagonal of the square, and so on. So anyway, there are several instances like this where one can contest the narratives. If one puts the chains of Aryan invasion theory around you, then those chains will not let you investigate Indian history prior to 1500 BC. You will stop with Harappa. By the way, Harappa is treated in NCERT textbooks as if it is disconnected from Indian civilization. They were outward looking. They were looking towards Sumeria. They were looking towards Egypt for any kind of inspiration, trade, and other such things. Nothing with the interior of India. That's the way NCERT is presenting it. We don't know their religion. We don't know their language. We don't know anything about them. This is the way it is presented. Disconnected.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
And this is in spite of the fact that now we have had Rakhi Garhi and we have had Piranna, and they've been around now for nearly a decade or more. And yet the NCERT still sticks to their Harappa narrative.
Nothing at
And
all.
according
Nothing
to them,
at all.
Harappa did not happen in present day Indian territory at all. Whereas the
Not at all.
maximum number of sites and the oldest sites are all in India.
Yes. And so the intent in NCERT textbooks is to put Harappa as an isolate, looking outside for inspiration. Perhaps they were driven to the south and they became Dravidians later on. That's why they have distinct culture from the north. So this is the kind of narrative that is embedded in NCERT textbooks. So if you have this chain of Aryan invasion theory, 1500 BC around your head, you're not able to break through from the chain. But if you just unshackle yourself and say, all right, let me look for evidence that 1500 BC is not limiting. If 1500 BC is not limiting, then on the knowledge systems of India, whether it is mathematics, whether it is astronomy, whether it is medicine, whether it is grammar, whether it is so many other things, can I have an exploration of when these things might have happened? For example, today, everybody takes a look at the dating of Indian personalities, whether it is Patanjali or Panini or whether it is Yajnavalkya. All these things are based on speculations by colonial historians, and those dates are received wisdom. People still use these ridiculous dates based upon the understanding of either this Sanskrit text that I got has got this language, which I'm putting to this period, and therefore he must have belonged to 500 BC or maybe to 200 current era. This is the kind of narrative, completely ignoring the internal evidence, astronomy and other things that are showing much earlier incidents for these texts. So bottom line, if one removes these constraints of Aryan invasion, which is the basis of our distortions, one is able to see Indian history in a much more logical framework with correspondence from various other branches of sciences. So yes, going back to the original issue on even the scientific fields are distorted, that is true, because we are not seeing the roots of sciences in the Indic traditions, because We have locked ourselves out of it by saying Aryan invasion.
The funny thing is that the hottest debate going on today among the Indic people, the Indic scholars, is about the dating of Mahabharata. And the controversy is not about 1500 BC at all. The controversy is whether it is something around 3100 BCE or is it 5561 BCE.
Right.
So that 1500 in any case is considered to be a joke by everybody in India.
Right.
And why it is not getting rubbed off on these idiotic AIT protagonists, I'm quite surprised. Of course, I use the word idiotic, so I think that is self-explanatory too. And it may not be actually idiotic. It is actually, I think, more tendentious, intentional, and supremacist. And you can use more epithets to that. That is something evil, actually. There's an evil intention behind it. That is the reason. And you brought it out beautifully, because if you anchor everything to 1500 BCE, then India does not get credited with everything. And of course, you have debunked the Aryan invasion theory so many times. We have done it. And so I got fed up. I said, okay, let me challenge them directly. And the Jaipur Dialogue has a 2.1 crore rupees prize going. And it's going begging. Nobody's claiming it. I mean, even for people like Michael Witzel, I think 2.1 crore is a good enough amount. Why don't they apply for it?
He should stand by what he's saying. For example, they talk about the Kuru and the Panchala and other kingdoms, Vedic, so-called Vedic tribes that lived in the Mahajanapada period, going to 800 BC, 600 BC, and so on. It is in that context he claims that Mahabharata was written and all these kind of things. So, yes, he should also say, how come Vedavyasa, who supposedly lived in this time frame, was able to see astronomical phenomena going back to thousands of years? Was he such an expert mathematician, astronomer? He's able to exactly back calculate everything and get the exact position of nakshatras and rashis and so on in the ancient times. He's got to address that question. Very often, the Western historians don't want to address this question. They will take one or two places where there are conflicts, which is why we have got a variety of dates from Mahabharata, by the way, that because of 5561 BCE or 3000 BC clustering of dates or 1500, 1700 and all these kind of dates. That's because there are slight differences in some of the narrations. The Western historians have tended to pick on these places where there are differences, and they've tended to amplify that and use that as a reason to reject everything, saying that it's unreliable. That is not the academic way. If something's unreliable, we should go through a process of saying, this data belongs to category A. Category A means highly reliable. There is no way I can dispute it. This data belongs to category B, where there is some dispute. These are the pro, these are the against. Some data belongs in category C, where I am not sure about this data. So let's categorize all the data in terms of what they offer, and then start the dialogue. Start with category A. You cannot dispute those things. What do you say about that? And one of them is the so-called Kali Yuga epoch that is there in all of our calendrical systems and books like Surya Siddhanta and other ones that talk about this phenomenon. Let's talk about that, starting with that, and so many others. So I think the tendency, like you correctly said, social scientists, inverted quotes, they tend to take one or two items and amplify the differences, and as a reason for rejecting everything completely, rather than academically going and categorizing, like I said, analyzing why one should use this and one should not use the other, and opening a dialogue. That is absent. So there's a tendency to very quickly take available data and build a narrative that cannot change. When I say this, I mean things like painted graveware. You take painted graveware and say that I found painted graveware in this time period in Hastinapura for 1200 BC. Therefore, Mahabharata could not have been earlier than that. What kind of a conclusion is that? The place that you call Mahabharata, is that the place where the ancient settlement was? Is that the place where the ancient riverbed was? Is that the place where you're digging today and claiming these things? Nobody has a clue. Nobody has a clue. But superficial connection of the dots is made, and this narrative is amplified very, very loudly by the Marxist media, because what they want is destruction of the old order. If your history is denied, if your history is distorted, if you're told that you're an oppressor and your way of life is very bad, now I can change you very quickly. Now you're open to be injected with a new ideology because you don't respect your ancestors' way of life anymore. So I can inject whatever I want, whether it be some Abrahamic thought or whether it be some communist thought or whatever, I can inject. So that is what is going on. India has become a huge laboratory for these guys, and a factory, if you will, where they've successfully alienated generations of Indian children and adults from their roots. And the results are there for us to see everywhere. I just showed 1 or 2 slides where people are going amok on the streets about Brahmin patriarchy, about privilege, about caste, about all kinds of narratives.
And nobody talks about biblical patriarchy.
Yes, the intellectual freedom does not extend to that.
And not just that, I don't know whether you've seen Vedveer Arya's work.
Yes.
For the post-Mahabharata calendar. And very logically, he shows that these people, they completely discounted our Puranic genealogies and actually chopped off something like 1380 years in between Buddha and the Shaka era. Right. And the Shaka era, the Shaka and Shakanta era, what he has shown.
Right.
It's very, very logical. And also he has got something about the Christian era. And I don't see any effort to counter that. All there is a shrugging of shoulders. Oh, who's he? He doesn't have authority. We've got the PhD. We are the Westerners. We have the authority. The hell with them. Give them a big spank across their face. I don't mind doing that.
Right. So Vedveerji has done an excellent job in.
Don't call me violent.
Yes.
It's just Shate Shatyam Samacharit. It's part of our Shastras.
Yes. So he's shown the difference in the 2 calendrical systems, about how 660-year difference is there in the calendrical system. And he's also highlighted what Kota Venkatachalam and others have done, showing that the Puranic account has been distorted by the colonial Indologists, saying these kings are mythical, we'll move those kings from here to there, we'll do the phonetic identification, Sandrakotos with some Chandragupta Maurya. All these kind of distortions have messed up with our history. Yes, so there is no systematic effort to try and see what Vedveer has done. Vedveer has actually gone there looking at the epigraphy. So much of epigraphy, so much of it has been discarded as forgeries by the British because it did not fit into the models that they had. Now, today as a scientist, what I say is, if I propose a model for, let's say, an economic model for something, then somebody gives me some data saying, Dr. Vedam, this data piece does not fit your model. Now, the logical thing for me to do is try to understand that. Why did my model fail? Is that data valid? Is the provenance of the data right? Does the data, why is it not fitting over here? Is my assumption in the model wrong? Is my mathematical relationships, if I had done so, is that wrong? So I go through a process of seeing why did the model fail and can the model be made better? That is now the scientific way of addressing logically, rationally a problem that we face, a red flag that we face. So Vedveer Arya is saying, here is all the discarded epigraphy that you've done because you call them forgeries. I am saying that there are 2 calendrical systems. If you use these 2 calendrical systems, my data is fitting in perfectly. So one has got to come and address that. One has got to come and address, why is Vedveer Arya wrong? Is he wrong? Why is he wrong if he is wrong? Such a kind of scholarly engagement has not happened. Rather, here is the punchline, Sanjay ji. What we see is, maybe 2 to 3 years ago, our famous historian, Romila Thapurji, she wrote an op-ed, by the way. She wrote an op-ed in the famous New York Times, the Kingmaker New York Times, in which she took pot shots at the Indian Science Congress and quoting some absurd outliers. She made her entire case based upon these things and said that is why serious historians are not engaging them. What she did not do is, she did not say, why is she not engaging the serious data items on the table that is contesting a theory? Why is she not contesting Professor Subhash Kak? Why is she not contesting Srikant Thalagiri? Why is she not contesting so many linguistic problems, astronomy problems? These are all serious scholars. They are not making any absurd kind of or wild allegations we cannot prove yet today. They're not doing that. They are coming with criticism of the existing narrative, using data that is there for anybody to analyze. But she doesn't say one word about these scholars. So the academic's way is, if I'm an academic in a certain area, my job is to keep abreast of the field, of all the papers published in that field. If somebody's, let's say I work in DNA or genetics or something like that, then my job is to study nature, that there's all these papers that come out and see who's claiming what, keep abreast of the field. And if there's something in my area, I should have an opinion on that. Do I agree with that person? Do I disagree with that person? If I disagree, write a paper and show this is why I disagree. That is the academic way. What we find here is Romila Thapar and other historians of her ilk, they don't even recognize these scholars. They don't even mention them by name. They don't even acknowledge their presence. So by ignoring them, they pretend the problem does not exist because they have the unequal podium. They have the podium where they can scream and shout and everybody listens to them. So they don't even give them space. They don't give these serious scholars on the Indic side any space. By not acknowledging their scholarship, these people hold on to their crumbling forts, if you will. That's what is going on.
Rajji, can you imagine a situation in the West where a scholar of Middle Eastern history, can he be awarded a PhD if he does not know Hebrew or Aramaic?
Right. Unimaginable. Unimaginable.
Unimaginable. Romila Thapar doesn't know Sanskrit, but she awards PhD. Forget about getting PhD. And medieval Indian history. Okay, you would think that anybody who is a serious scholar of history of medieval Indian history, it is de rigueur to have a knowledge of Persian, not a working knowledge, a deep knowledge of Persian, because all the manuscripts are all written in Persian, and of course Sanskrit.
Right.
Mr. Irfan Habib, he is, very boldly and very proudly telling on Doordarshan, well, I don't know Arabic or Persian, but he's awarding degrees. He's heading the Indian Council of Historical Research. This is what Marxist authority is all about. And let me tell you an anecdote, a very nice anecdote about Romila Thapar. When we were debating this Aryan invasion theory, where we intended to announce this prize, and we thought Romila Thapar would be the rightful person to claim it, because she is the one who has been asserting it, of course, with all the caveats, maybe, and this is probably this, and maybe not invasion, maybe this is migration. And of course, we now say that, okay, maybe it is tourism. They just came for tourism. So I wrote her email and invited her over the Jaipur Dialogues. I think it's 2018 or something. Don't exactly recall. I have the email. So she was very gracious to reply to that. You know what her reply was? Actually, I'm touring Rajasthan in those days, so I will not be able to come to your. Damn it, you're touring Rajasthan. Come to Jaipur. Jaipur is in Rajasthan. And of course, I invited Ramachandra Guha as well. Well, he didn't even reply. So this is the standard of these Marxist scholars. They have no courage to talk about their scholarship outside their cozy clubs. That is their standard.
Very true. Very true. I'll support your anecdote with one of my own, Sanjay ji. So when I was working with a state in southern India on the textbook reform, on the textbook review, social studies, so I engaged with them for 2 years with a team, and we had 2 to 3 workshops with them. The directorate of textbooks over there she wrote to scholars on both sides of the spectrum, what she called as the Marxist scholars, what she called as the indie-cleaning scholars, because she didn't want, she wanted a balance. Understandably, very admirably, she wanted a balance. Our experience was the Marxist scholars refused to engage. Each time she invited them for the workshop, which I was handling on textbook issues, they did not come. Not one, not two, 3 or 4 scholars all had other engagements the first time. They had illness or whatever, none of them could come. This happened 2 times. The third workshop that I gave, she gave an ultimatum. If you don't come, I'm going to accept all his proposals that be there in the textbook. Then 2 NCERT professors turned up after that happened. So I can understand this reluctance on their part to engage because there is no ground for them. Once you present evidence, there is no way they can take this forward. And just one more idea. You talked about the lack of knowledge of Sanskrit. You're absolutely on the dot. So in the recently concluded WAVES conference in Bangalore, 2020, December, my co-author was Sitaram Ayagiri. He's my neighbor in Houston. He's a Vedic scholar, a deep knowledge of Sanskrit and so on. So I said, Sitaram Garu, can we please take a couple of verses? Because I'm seeing that throughout the Marxist media, they quote Griffith for the Rigvedic translations. They quote Griffith. And Griffith has got some bizarre translations over there. And they quote these translations in support of their theories. So can you please take a look at that? So we selected a couple of them. He analyzed it, and bottom line, it was utter nonsense. So he said, Sitaram Garu said that in order to, there is no question of translation, first of all. You cannot translate Sanskrit, Vedic Sanskrit, because there is not a word-to-word translation from one language to another, but always interpretation. And he said to interpret, you must have deep knowledge of the Vedangas. You must have deep knowledge of Chandas. You must have deep knowledge of Vyakarna. All these things, once you have knowledge of the Indic system, with that, you can have a window to the mind of the writers of the Rig Veda. And even that, we are not sure. You're interpreting it through a particular instance, and you can say this is what they intended by this kind of a script. Whereas what we see in Romila Thapar or what we see in Wendy Doniger or Griffith is use a dictionary, English to Sanskrit to English, and use the nearest meanings and write whatever comes. That is what we see. Very unfortunate. but this is what people are quoting. This is what people are quoting.
But it is a joke, that whenever the term Agni is used in the Vedas, Agni has deep meanings.
Right.
Okay, and they use it for physical fire. Yes. You can't be more stupid than that.
Right.
And they are great Sanskrit scholars translating the Vedas. Just imagine.
And they have the adhikara. They will not let an emic scholar, Indian scholar, to come to the table because they, after all, know Proto-Indo-European. They know the European languages. They know the grammar. Who are you? You have no idea about these things. So you are excluded.
They need to be called names, of course. I think you are too civil to do that. Maybe I will do that someday.
But the scholarship is obvious, completely discredited. This kind of thing.
I think a very small example is Professor Subhash Kak wrote a very interesting piece on how these people interpret the first richa of Rig Veda. Om Agnimile Purohitam Yagyasya Devam Ritvajam Bhotaram Ratnadhatam. So everything is external, okay? There is no internal dimension to either Agni or Hotaram or Ratnam or anything. There is no inner dimension at all. So Ratna is treasure, Agni is physical fire, all that.
I have a good dictionary, you see.
Yes. They don't know the meaning of what is Bhavartha. You ask them what is Bhavartham, they won't be able to tell you. That is the status of these people.
This is what I meant when I said systems perspective. In that slide, I said systems perspective is missing. A systems perspective would mean we take a small part, but you don't just study it in isolation. We need to see how that part is fitting in with the puzzle, with the whole. What are the interactions around that part? How does that, all the interactions are necessary to understand the contextual meaning of that piece that you pulled out. So this is a problem throughout our NCERT textbook, starting, like you correctly said, from the colonial period. They have used Sanskrit English translation dictionary and done all of these things. However, the system's perspective is missing. How does this fit into the cultural, historical, social record of India? That is missing. And that is critically necessary if we are going to talk about our identity.
Right. That is how people like, Christine Fair and Audrey Truschke, they interpret that Agni Pariksha as the physical fire.
Yes, yes.
Nobody can be more ignorant than that. It's obvious that this is not the physical fire that they're talking about. And if they go through the Indian tradition, they'll find Agni Pariksha being done in hundreds of ways.
Right.
Not hundreds, tens of ways.
Right.
This is obviously, this is that she is being asked to burn in the fire of Prayashchit, because the whole thing happened because of Sita Mata doubting the intention of Lakshman. She's simply being asked, you do this, undergo the Agni of Prayashchit.
Karmic balance. It's a karmic balance, and you have to undergo that because of the karmic balance.
Exactly. But these people do not understand the theory of karmic balance. These people do not understand the meaning of Agni, the various dimensions of Agni. If you tell them Jataragni and Udaragni also, they will not understand. They will probably think that it is intestine on fire.
You should read the paper that we wrote for Waves, where Sitaram Garu is talking about the Gauri. About the
I would be grateful if you can forward it to me.
I will. Griffith has made.
I generally try and make fun of these people, so I think I can make good fun of these people one of these days. They don't deserve rational arguments. They only deserve to be made fun of.
But that leads to an unfortunate and sad question, Sanjayji. Given so much of distortions embedded in our textbooks, how do we get out of this? NEP is showing a slight window saying you can align it like this. I've had several groups that reached out to me trying to say, can we work on aligning content with Indic civilization? I gladly agreed, and wherever I can, I'm helping out. But the question is, there is no institutional support. I'm seeing small groups here and there desperately trying to develop content to align with NEP 2020. So I do not see an initiative yet, maybe because I'm ignorant. I do not see that from the government saying that here is the forum through which one can contribute towards the rewriting of the textbooks or realigning with NEP's policies. Right now, NEP has watered it down from the draft version to the final version. And further, they've removed all the teeth by saying it's only a recommendation. So it looks like you just killed yourself. You shot yourself in the foot by saying it's only a recommendation and not a requirement. So
you should not underestimate my colleagues. They have ingenious ways of watering down everything. What comes out in the policy and what actually gets translated, the bureaucracy gets to decide about it. And that's why you need me. Because I can actually buttonhole them and fix them to anchor them to the actual policy. So,
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that in the battles that happened in the boardroom when they were deciding on the policy, clearly one side won out by forcing these watering downs, and this side did not have enough arguments to say these are absolutely necessary. It's very unfortunate.
Matter. It just doesn't matter. Let me tell you, the thing about bureaucracy is that whatever gets written, ultimately, whoever has the power, the bureaucracy will toe the line. So we have to muster up our power, make our pressure groups, and force them to do what we want them to do. Why? Because the Prime Minister is with us. He's going around everywhere, and now he's promoting the cause of the local language, the cause of the local languages in higher education.
Right.
You see, something that he said that, okay, that we'll want to do higher education in local languages, technical and management education in local language. That doesn't appear in the NEP. Does it appear in the NEP in so many words? That is a recommendation. But then That is how it is taken through.
Yes, very unfortunate. So the
And you know
field has been
what?
left open.
You must learn, all of us, not you, but all of us must learn how to pressurize the
Right.
bureaucracy. That fine
Absolutely.
art we do not know. And I can help out with
Right.
that because I've spent 35 years there.
Right, right, right. Excellent, excellent. We have to see how we can work on this one, Sanjay ji. So the field now has been left open to all these individual players. For example, I'm offering courses at Hindu University of America, where I'm trying to say this is the history that was erased. Here is the evidence. It's not just my blurting out rubbish over there, but here is the evidence for it. Here's my critique of the evidence. Here is where the evidence is leading to. Therefore, these old linguistic models need to be modified, and these are the evidence from genetics, from astronomy, from sciences, mathematics, modified linguistics, and other things. This is what we have. So individuals are doing this. How do we institutionalize these things? That's a critically important issue. Everybody asks me that, and I'm sitting over here in one corner of the world, and I don't know how to do it. I really don't know. So if somebody can help out, that'll be wonderful. So let's see how we can take this forward.
Let's put our heads together. It's not an impossible
Mm.
task because there are some people who know how to get bureaucracy to do what we want them to do. Because
Mhm.
they make fool of the politicians, they can't make fool of people like us.
Mhm.
So on that note, I think it's time to move to the questions and answers. And let me request all my viewers to please like the video, share it around. Also, subscribe the channel. And in whatever way you can help us through your contributions, please do. Questions and answers.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Thank you, Prakash. Thank you. Thank you, Sarashis. Thank you, Cafe de Mar. Oh, wonderful. Aparna ji, sirs, such an important topic needs immediate attention from all quarters. Saraswati Sangam is devoted to it and hope to benefit from your guidance.
Certainly, certainly. So please do reach out. Please reach out, and let's try to get a critical mass of interested people going on this.
Yes, yes. You can write to us. You can write to Jaipur Dialogues, and we will help you get in touch with Raj Vedam ji and all the others who are interested parties to this, I should say, civilizational venture. Krishna, my kid was victim of Brahmin abuse many times in school. Had to call the school and warn the teacher. How do you think we can refute such narrative in school texts? Kids take texts as absolute truth. Well,
It is
that's what we are talking about.
It is so unfortunate. This is a real pain that is felt by parents throughout the country. Throughout the country, we have this experiencing this agonizing pain that our students, our children are subject to hate speech. This is hate speech. This is hate speech when they come with a linguistic theory and impose these kind of narratives on the Indian civilization. As a consequence of which, like I told you, the conflict model, the oppressor-oppressed model has come. There is no contextual understanding. There is no attempt to see, even as a word called caste, what is the etymology of that word? Where did it come from? If we talk about Jati Varna, what did it mean in the Indian context? No attempt is made. The only attempt is a quick association with negativism. That negativism has come because of the 5 frameworks that I said. Colonial framework, which wanted to show Europeans are biblical chronology, Europeans are better than Indians. Eurocentric to show again European supremacy, the missionaries who wanted to convert Indians to show Hinduism is bad, and the socialists who want to again destroy the Indic system, and the Marxists finally who also want to destroy the Indic system, conflict dynamics. These 5 forces are why our textbooks are, I'll excuse my word, screwed up in our system. So if we can go about challenging these frameworks, we can demand maybe up to the Supreme Court that such narratives should get out. For that, we need that critical mass. We need the institutional support. We need people to come together. First step, parents are getting irate, and that is good. If you're enraged, that is good. Talk to the principal. Tell the principal to escalate it to the directorate of textbooks. That is one step. On to the education minister. Keep escalating this. Keep writing in social media so that we make enough noises about these things. It is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to talk about ridiculous notions like Brahmin patriarchy, Brahmin privilege, and these kind of things, especially when the evidence is nebulous for any of these things. These are experiences of the white Abrahamic male experience in Europe. The angry white male is a person who followed biblical traditions and enslaved people, Africans. They are the ones who did genocide, world wars, and other such things. You cannot take that in your sociological model and force fit it on India, saying angry white male has become the Brahmin male over here. It is ridiculous. Such a situation has never existed, whether in terms of power, in terms of social structures, in terms of the value to society and other such things. It has never existed. So it's up to us to contest it. This is what I meant when I said systems perspective. Let's understand how these parts fit together. We need to understand that. It's not the conflict model. These guys are pushing the conflict model on us. Let's understand that.
Exactly. And all those people who criticize the Brahmin privilege, I think we should readily offer them Brahmin privilege and make them subject to those 120 odd restrictions that the Brahmins were subject to, as against the 2 or 3 that the Shudras were subject to. Let me say, let us see how many will opt for that.
Right.
Let's list that out. Actually, I think that needs listing out.
Right.
Let's list that out.
Yes. So recently, somebody had filed an RTI recently asking the NCERT textbook to respond to the notion that the Mughals had built temples and repaired temples. NCERT chairman came back saying, I have no evidence. That is the right thing to do. Challenge every one of these notions. Ask them, where is the data for this? And let's see. Let's collate together that NCERT is clueless. They got no evidence for any of these things other than assertions by NCERT officers.
NCERT is a joke, The Yogendra Yadav was a member, you can imagine. Next. Samir Taylor, wonderful initiative. Please have a show to discuss how to pressurize the bureaucracy. Oh, yes, why not? I will call Nageshwar Rao, my good friend, and then we'll tell you all the tricks. And anybody else who wants to get educated can be on the show. Okay, Poonamabi. Why the baptism by fire is great holy purification, but Agni Pariksha is human and cruel. A modern woman having multiple partners, empowerment, and Draupadi is oppressed.
Yours not to question why. Yours what to consume and sit in agony. I'm changing the charge of the light brigade over there.
Consume and die.
Consume and die, yes. That is our fate, according to the Marxists.
Okay. What do we have next? Harshal. Namaste and happy Shivratri to both of you. Har Har Mahadev. Astronomy is vast enough subject to have its own place in school syllabus. It is naturally appealing to young minds, and Bharati achievements are largely spared from distortions. Thoughts?
Yes. Om Namah Shivaya to you too. So I think, yes, astronomy is one of the fundamental sciences in India, having a very long tradition. If you believe the Westerners, again, the Aryan invasion linguistic model, we learned it from the Babylonians and the Greeks. But if you throw that junk out and investigate astronomy for what it is, you'll see a deep tradition of astronomy going back to very, very ancient periods of time. And yes, there is strong need to teach that, because today, if I say nakshatra, if I say Rashi, guess what? There'll be a Pavlovian response in our people saying, I don't believe in all these things. These are all illiterate stuff. These are all bogus, spurious horoscopes. I don't like all these things. You have been trained. You have been mind colonized. You have been programmed to react this way by these 5 forces that I talked about. So how do we combat that? We need to deconstruct our thinking, decolonize ourselves, and say, here is enormous Siddhantic astronomy, mathematical astronomy. Why mathematics? Even before mathematics, there are stories, metaphors, morals, wisdom encoded in stories. leading on to mathematical astronomy, leading on to enormous content in astronomy. But if you ask our own professors on the Indic side as well as the Marxist side, they'll say Max Muller has told us all the Puranas, everything's unreliable. Therefore, I will not touch any of them on astronomy. This is the kind of thinking that is there in academia. How do you go and kick this out of the system? That's where the dialogue should be. So it is right now the scorched earth policy. I'm sorry. One has got to tear these texts out, and one has got to bring in the astronomy, several other things into the textbooks. NEP 2020 has given the reason to do that. However, like I said, it does not have the teeth. How do we go to every individual state, SCERT, and tell the chairman, you need this content over there? How do we go to CBSE board or to NCERT and tell them, you need to make these changes happen? That is still controlled by a cabal. That cabal will not allow these changes to happen. That cabal will reach out to Harvard University, it'll reach out to Columbia, University of Chicago, where those doyens, those people over there with Adhikara, they'll say, no, don't take any of these things. Max Muller has told us how to think.
You know what?
That received wisdom will be there.
We've got the term for these 5 forces, Beautiful Hindi term. We call them Panch-Makar. The 5 Makar. You understand Makar?
Not really. I don't want to speculate here, but go ahead.
Yeah, basically charlatans, Panch-Makar. Yes. Of course, it doesn't have the ring of Panch-Makar. So who are these Panch-Makars? Mullah, missionary, Marxist, Macaulay's children, and the media.
I think it rounds up. It rounds up exactly what I've said. These 5 frameworks. It correctly encapsulates them.
So this 5 framework and Panch-Makar, they rhyme, and our viewers will understand because they're familiar with this term Panch-Makar. We popularized it.
Okay.
Basically coined by our friend Sandeep Dev, but Jaipur Dialogues has the credit of popularizing it.
Wonderful.
Okay, next one. सौरशीष, मैं एक नागरिक के तौर पे फिर एक भाई एक बेटे से तौर पे पूछ रहा हूँ, क्या सच में वेस्टर्न साइंस ही सिर्फ साइंस, दूसरा और कोई तरीका नहीं जिसमें वह बिना किसी रिसर्च ये फिर एक एबनॉर्मल सोच की जगह सिर्फ I think he's trying to circumlocute like the Western scholars. What he wants to say is that can I do a research without resorting to Western science?
Do research without resorting to Western science. Absolutely. You can, what is Western science? That's a misnomer. Western science is a misnomer because if you see my talks on transfer of Indic knowledge to other civilizations, including what C.K. Raju has also talked about earlier, about all these things, you'll understand that Indian knowledge systems went from India to Arabic countries in 711 after invasion by Bin Qasim and others. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid, he was a patron of learning in Baghdad, and he acquired a lot of Sanskrit scholars and others, either through slavery or whatever, and they made them translate all the Sanskrit texts into Arabic and Persian. These books were injected into Spain, in Cordoba and places like that. And in Toledo, there were translation schools that will translate from Arabic into Latin. We're talking about 10th century, 11th century. In that period of time, remember, Europe was backward, primitive, illiterate, disease-ridden. Ever since Constantine Christianity came, they burned down all the libraries. All the Greek libraries were gone. All the so-called pagan knowledge systems are gone. Everything was gone, and Europe promptly descended into illiteracy, into disease, into poverty, into all kinds of oppression. This was the state of affairs till the so-called Reformation. Till the so-called Reformation, when they threw off the yoke of the Catholic Church, this was the problem. That led to Renaissance, Reformation, and the age of reason in what they call in Europe. However, that age of reason would have been impossible if they did not have the knowledge systems from India. These are people who are using Latin numerals. They're using Roman numerals even as in 16th century, 17th century. How can you add here, multiply huge numbers? How can you do mathematics? The only thing they could do was geometry, the figures and diagrams and things of this nature. They could not do any kind of intricate mathematics. So their association with mathematics, with sciences, with astronomy, with all these things, their meaning Western Europe, came after the translation of Sanskrit works into Persian and Arabic, into Latin. And that is what led all the thinkers. I've compiled lots of data on this. Copernicus, I got to the entire Guru Parampara, and I can show the translation from Indic thoughts all the way into Copernicus works and things like that. Or whether they're talking about Galileo, any big thinker you take from the West, I'll show you the ecosystem or how they got over there. So the point is, there's no such thing as Western science. There is only science that was brought about by your ancestors, enormous amounts of science, compiled by the Arabs. Arabs compiled Indian science, as well as Indian science that went to Greece. Indian science went to Greece in Pythagorean era, in Socrates, Plato, Alexander, that era. That also they compiled, they got that knowledge. Although that knowledge was burnt out in the Byzantine kingdom, these people inherited that in Lebanon, in Tunisia, all these kind of places where Roman Empire was. They were able to recover some of these Greek works before they became Christianized. So Muslims consolidated the information, and some of the greatest scientists, think people like Al-Ghazali and so many other Islamic scientists, they were on a diet of Indian knowledge, Greek knowledge, and they made advances. I'm not going to deny that. They made advances. Al-Haytham, for example, his work on optics is amazing. But the question to ask is, how much of that was Indic knowledge? We have lost that in India because our sources were destroyed by the Muslims. Knowledge was destructively obtained by them. So we don't know what was the state of knowledge in India, at which point Al-Haytham, having taken knowledge from India on mathematics and other sciences, was able to develop it further. That knowledge has gone to Newton and others, and that has come to us today as if it is Western science. Sorry, that is not
exactly.
Always deconstruct these words. Western science is a misnomer. There's no such thing. Today, yes, science is growing by leaps and bounds, but even if the so-called Western countries are filled with Indic brains, they're filled with Asian brains, Chinese brains, and European brains, and so on and so forth. So where is this notion of Western science? It's a misnomer.
Next. Mr. Vedam, can you kindly guide us to good historical source books written in regards to Indic history before 1000 AD?
Okay, so this is a difficult question. Majumdar's books are good. So please, there is a multi-volume set of Majumdar online. You might like to start over there. Other than that, in rigorous way, Majumdar is the only one who comes to mind right now. There might be others, but let me compile and say. But R.C. Majumdar, that is the name you want to keep in mind, and see. Go and take a look at his books.
Yes, but do not read AIT from Majumdar.
Yes. Clearly. Some there are issues. There's not as if everybody is perfectly clean or perfectly bad. There are issues. A lot better than.
No, he cannot be blamed because AIT was the reigning wisdom at that time.
True, and there is also this this lady, I forget her name, Upinder Singh. She's written a book recently on prayer.
Manmohan Singh's daughter.
Yes. So it's a lot better than earlier Marxist works because she has acknowledged much of the problems in the Marxist narrative. She's acknowledged that. Whether she endorses that or whether she's got a new narrative in place, all the same, she's brought out some of these issues. So do take a look at Upinder's book also.
Arvindan Neelakandan also endorsed that book in our AIT discussions.
Yes.
Poonam Abhi, but I am a Hindu and will keep coming back with the same question. How long will they be able to deny what evidence they buried? Dharti Ma is turning up. Dharti Ma will turn up everything. Dharti Ma even turned up Mata Sita. So yes. Dharti Mata is not going to stay back.
We continue to keep getting the evidence and building it up and making this case. So Poonamji, please continue to be an activist. Go out there and create the relevant noises over here. Let's put the pressure on. And like Sanjay ji says, once we have a nice coalition, we can pressure the bureaucrats and demand with RTIs and other such things, demand why the change not happening. That can happen.
I know what exactly triggers the bureaucrats. I will disclose it in time. Chronologically, age of reason, science started about 100-150 years of the Europeans reaching Bharat. I just mentioned it elsewhere and I was doubted.
Yeah, yes. So one has got to not buy the European spiel unquestioningly. You cannot say Renaissance was the flowering of European thought. This is what is the poetic language that is there in European books. You can't buy that. How can people who are illiterate under the oppression of church, disease-ridden, as there were bubonic plagues and black plagues and things like that, how did they come out and start inventing just about everything under the sun? Starting from Bernoulli's principle to going to spaceships to Jupiter and Mars and other such places. How is it possible in less than 600 years' time? This is the question that every thinking, logical person must ask. And you'll see that they built on earlier knowledge systems. They built on that. They were not allowed to do that, by the way, because the church was incredibly afraid of Indian mathematics. Indian algebra was like
I know.
black magic.
Yes.
Satan's works for them. You have an unknown number. The word problem says you do this, you do that, you do something, and you get this unknown number. That was like black magic. How do you do that? So they had tried to squash down Indian ideas of infinity, Indian ideas of algebra, and other such things. So Western scientists could only secretly study these things, as, for example, Copernicus and other such people. And it is only after the Reformation they were able to come out when the age of rationalism came, age of reason came. This is their age, by the way. We were always rational for the longest time, but their age of reason and rationalism came. They're able to overthrow the suppression of the church, and they were able to come forward with these theories. Even today, the church is on a warpath with science. It is not as if the church is aligned with science. Today, you go to some fundamentalist Christian groups, not even fundamentalist, even moderate Christian groups, talk to them about theory of evolution, and you see what will happen.
I think Darwin is the greatest sinner in the annals of the church.
How can you be
But
mistaken? God
I think our
man in
people
this
must
period.
also realize the church has great adaptability. They persecuted Galileo, and finally
Right,
in 1992, very quietly, they have rehabilitated Galileo. I don't know how many of people know that.
right. It is just true.
Uh, and then they promoted somebody like Stephen Hawking because he
Mhm.
talked about the what is called that God's moment. So
Yes. The
that kind of
beginning of
justified
time.
creationism.
Yes, creation beginning. Time had a beginning.
Yes.
In the
So
beginning, God
church is
created
very
the
cunning.
worlds.
Church is very cunning. Akshay Chitnis, sir, what will be judiciary stand when government starts correcting history? It's none of their business because even they may not know Sanskrit Bhavat and love to quote Westerners. Well, the, the problem in, or rather, the good thing, because I am also a qualified lawyer now, enrolled in the bar, so I can answer this question with authority. Authority is all important. The good thing about the court is that there are always two sides. So you cannot take a unilateral decision. And you would have seen that in the Shabarimala case. That's the greatest example because there were two sides. They had to, or in the, for that matter, in the Ram Mandir case, they were two sides. And ultimately, the stronger arguments did prevail. So
Very true.
don't be so
Yeah,
pessimistic about them.
I think the key is to show the court does not have jurisdiction. If they had jurisdiction, they must have expertise. So the court will try to put it always in a framework where it thinks it has got jurisdiction, human rights issues, this, and so on. So don't allow it to go to that framework at all. Always position it in the dharmic civilization and deny the jurisdiction. Then I think we have a fighting chance there.
It depends. It depends. There are a lot of tactics. That is called courtcraft.
Yes.
Okay, next. Poonamji again. Hindu knowledge was destroyed along with the Bharatiya brains that could have taken it forward and head start moronized Hindus. Okay, she's quoting Ishwari Prasad ji, very eminent
Right.
historian, of course.
True enough. So if you look at the history of science in India, you'll find that there was a growth in sciences, very logical, philosophical, rational outgrowth of knowledge. Each Indian scientist quoted the earlier ones. So, for example, if you look at Charaka Samhita, it will start with Brahma. Brahma gave this Vidya to Ashwini. Ashwini gave it to somebody else, somebody else. Then it came down to Charaka. So citation trial is there. That shows that Indian scientists were building a compendium of knowledge sources, whether you're looking at Aryabhata's works or Bhaskara, who gave his commentary to Aryabhatiya and other such things, and going on into the future, you find that Indian scientists were abreast of knowledge in the rest of the country and always building on that knowledge base. We find that. So there was an interruption to this when the Islamic period came. Our NCERT textbooks do not talk about this. The scientific tradition was killed in India wherever the Islamic period people were in power. So many of the scientists fled to the protection of the South, where Vijayanagar kingdom allowed them once again expression of scientific ideas. Sayana, for example, Prime Minister of Vijayanagar kingdom, he continued with ideas and so on. So there is a reason why even in Kerala School of Mathematics, that thrived again in southern India and not in northern India. In northern India, we have evidence that, for example, Aurangzeb, he sent soldiers off to Benares to break up any Hindus having any sammelan. If you had a sammelan, if you had a group of scholars sitting down on the banks of Ganga and talking, he would go and break them up. So there's no attempt to allow any, rather, there was every attempt made to break up any intellectual, stimulating, traditional knowledge exchange anywhere in the country. There were attempts to squash all the pilgrimages, whether it's Kumbh Mela and other such things. They made efforts to stop every one of these things. It was not just religious bigotry. Maybe it started there, but it eventually went on to destroying the Indic ecosystem. Then I talked about the ethnocide of the British. It just fell. It just precipitously fell once the British came, and we have lost everything today.
Okay, next one, Vinay. Raj sir as well as Sanjay ji, do you have recommended books lists or
Yes,
on Goodreads?
I have
my
recommended
books are
list.
there on Goodreads. I have 3 books on Goodreads if you like to read them.
Right.
Read the reviews.
So do take a look at my Facebook page. A long time back, I gave a list of interesting books to read. So you might like to take a look at that.
Okay. I've also been giving this list on Jaipur Dialogue from time to time. Poonam Abhiji, once again, the 2 Abrahamic religions are like amoeba, can change their shape to whatever and devour anything and everything. Needs you know what my opinion and original too. Well, I don't know whether it is original. Anyway, let's move to the next one. That's an observation. Can we move to the next one, please? Abhishek, do you think it is possible to change the fake propaganda history in new education policy? And do you see anything happening towards it? Question to both. I think we have answered this at length, so I would suggest that you take a little trouble and go back to the beginning of this entire presentation. Prashant Gupta, Rajiv, have personally attended many of talks, very informative. When can we get a book on your research authored by you?
Every day I pray to Vakdevi, every day I pray to Saraswati Ma to give me the strength to finish writing what I've started. One day it will come.
Writing books is a very tedious business. Ask me. Next. Prashant Gupta, Sanjay ji and Raji have taught my kids our real history by learning from people like yourself, and once they have to write to get marks. I think all parents have to do this. I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yes, and it's important to in the conversations I have with high school teachers in the workshops, I recommend that when they are presenting the content in the classroom, also say that scientists are discovering these new things about these earlier assertions. That way, children's minds will be ignited. Even if they study for the exams, they would be ignited. Their minds will know that this is what my teacher told me 5 years ago, that the scientists are discovering something new, and that child will be motivated to study that. So in the textbook changes, I recommend, I've worked with 2 states so far. I recommend that if you don't want to bring in this other content, at the very least, this side of the page, when you have a box on Aryan invasion theory, This side of the page, you have a box saying that scientists are challenging these theories on these grounds. And let the school teacher present both theories and allow critical evaluation in the classroom. Let children acquire critical comprehension skills. So that is also missing today. We don't even have a foot in the door at this point. So textbooks in NEP and others, going forward, if they don't have the guts, and I call it guts, to change, then they should at least have, if you talk about this bigoted history on this side of the page, this side of the page must have at least a box saying what are the challenges to that old idea. That is necessary. Otherwise, change is not going to happen in our country.
Right. Next one. Saurashis, मैं वेस्टर्न साइंस इसलिए बोल रहा हूँ कि उधर सब कुछ ऑब्जर्व किया जाता है मशीन्स के थ्रू, उसके बाद थियरी दिया जाता है, जैसा सेल के अंदर न्यूक्लियस किस चीज़ से बना है वो सिर्फ इलेक्ट्रॉन माइक्रोस्कोप से ऑब्जर्व किया जाता है, उसके बिना नामकरण से हर चीज़ रंग रूप और मशीन मदर से किया जाता है, न कि उसको दिमाग से ऑब्जर्व करते हैं. आई थिंक यू गॉट दिस complete misnomer of an idea. I would suggest that you read Schrodinger's biography to learn how he reached his quantum mechanics theory. This is, that typically what is called a colonized mind is speaking, that, okay, the Western have the superior intellectual prowess and they observe everything. The oldest observation traditions are in India. This is what we told you. Krishna Sundar, my niece was born in 2012. She's going to learn the same old BS from CBSE, ICSE like me. This is a bit too much, sir.
It's unfortunate, but please be an activist. Everybody internalize the message and be an activist. Only that way we can get a critical mass to change things.
Quite right. And I think all parents need to become activists. Okay, next. Nikhala Chandra, some young Brahmins insist on Varna by birth, oppose intercaste marriage, and we should not compromise the culture in the name of unity. How to reconcile? I have written a critic, which is appreciated by a lot of people as a good critic, and that is against the Paramparavadins. So that Paramparavadi critic, it is available on my Medium blog. Why don't you have a look at it? If you want, we can always put it there in the description. Avinash Kumar, time has come. All Sanatanis, nationalists, join hands together and start correct Indian history movement pan-India. The students, parents, teachers, scholars, scientists, and general people in large must all be part of that movement. Only a movement of such scale shall put the pressure on the present government. We had this little session on the textbook writing in one of the Jaipur dialogues, the physical Jaipur dialogues before COVID. I don't remember which one. I think 2018. And I think it was Aravindan Neelakandan who gave this idea. I think it's a very good idea. I'll articulate it for you, Rajji, and for Avinash Kumarji. He said that the best way to do this is to actually write a few textbooks and then start promoting them. So it becomes very easy for the governments and other textbook boards to accept them at a later date. Gave the example of Upinder Ji's book, the Upinder Kaur's book. That is the book, and of course it is written by Manmohan Singh Ji's daughter, so it shouldn't, Congress would not be able to oppose it. It's the right thing to do, that we promote Upinder Singh Ji's book as a textbook. That is something that can be done. And if other people had written more textbooks on real Indian histories, then our task as activists would have been easier. Rajji.
Right, absolutely right. Completely concur with what you said. To give our own experience, we worked with an Indian state between 2017 to 19, and there we gave several recommendations, class 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 also, several recommendations. What we found is the professionalism isn't there to pick up the changes by the textbook writers. So even though we would say, here is a problem, this should be rewritten, we found that they were not up to it to understand what the issue was to do it. So now in 2021, we are working with one more state, And in this state, we are actually giving the recommended writing. So not only have we said, here is a problem, here is the issue with that, then we're saying it has to be rewritten like this. And we rewrite that section with the references and say, this is what you need to do. So this way, by actually rewriting the content, we hope that we can overcome the problem of lack of professionalism in some textbook writers. We hope that we can do that. And other point that you made, Sanjay is absolutely right. The people who understand the ecosystem, the battle, the issues, the facts, and so on, they must make an attempt to write the textbooks. And the other side of the problem is people like me who got a day job in a different area than history. And balancing two worlds or two full-time jobs is incredibly difficult. So there is no institutional support for people like me to take a sabbatical with, let's say, NCERT for a year or so, and actually sit and write those textbooks. Can the government do that? I'll be glad to pack my bags and work in Delhi for the next 1 year if the government does that.
Okay. Next one. Nataraj Deshpande, Mahashivratri ki hardik shubhkamnaएं. Today I received my son's favorite book, Unbreaking India. He's ecstatic to see it. Thank you very much. That is one attempt to rewrite the history of the partition and history of Kashmir. On this auspicious day of Mahashivratri, let us awake our inner Shivatva and destroy all evils again. Our Dharma, Hara Hara Mahadev, Hara Hara Mahadev. Okay, that brings us to the end of this episode. So it's been a pretty long one, very patient answers by Rajji as usual, and wonderful presentation. I think of all the people who come to Jaipur Dialogues, his presentations are definitely the best. I think he really works hard at them. So thank you, Rajji, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, all viewers. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Jai Hind, Vande Mataram. Thank you.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.